The time for silence is over. There was once an unprecedented time in American history when common citizens of their day began to define the rights of man and documented how those rights were being violated by their current government. They wrote to each other. They debated with each other. Ultimately, it was these common citizens who recorded these rights for all eternity, and furthermore created a new and free nation founded on these rights with liberty and justice for all of its citizens. Times have changed, but these rights remain.
I don't take responsibility.
That all citizens have the right to life. That all citizens have the right to pursue happiness. That all citizens are created equal. That all citizens have the right to a public trial. That all citizens have the right to peacefully assemble. That all citizens have the right to petition their government. What happens when you try to exercise these rights today? Is this government honoring your rights? Or are they violating them? Is this the government that those citizens aspired to? There is a solution.
I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility.
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition. Good afternoon and welcome to The Left Speaks. Wow, what a week. I mean, first presidential debate. We've got tweets asking organizations that are fascist, white supremacist, whatever you want to call it at this point, to stand by, stand ready. We've got, it seems like every major Republican coming down with coronavirus, which was a hoax. We've got those further on the left advocating for these people to stay sick, possibly even die. We've got major members of the Democratic Party trying to be civil and hope that they survive this mess of their own creating, if you ask me, but, you know, at least come out of it well and make it through. And we've got those on the right asking, where's the civility? Where's the tolerant left? Amazing how quickly things are reversing here. We're going to touch into a couple of topics today, and as always, the phone lines are open. If you're a conservative, you get priority. 855-915 5338, 815-955-LEFT. I'd love to speak to you. Again, pretty much any topic is open. This episode's going to be a little bit different. We're not going to have as many video clips for some things. There's a personal experience I've had in the last couple of days that I'm going to relay. Obviously, I can't share some of that stuff because there's other people's names involved. So I'll relay the story. I will not be able to provide a source on it right now. I think you can talk to people that are a little bit more vocal in politics and find the same information. I also think in the next week or two, we'll have some statistics and data coming out that hold that up. But there's a reason that people have been concerned about Trump's sayings emboldening those people that are on the extreme right. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. As always, coronavirus, Black Lives Matter, civility between both sides at this point, which is what a lot of this episode is going to focus on. Those are all up for discussion. Some of the radical right stuff's going to be up for discussion. And some of the radical left stuff is up for discussion. And if you have a take, again, feel free to call in 855-915-LEFT. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is the new calls for civility on both sides. Why isn't the left, or why rather are some of those members of the left not feeling sorry for this president who was recently diagnosed with coronavirus and transferred to Walter Reed Hospital, though they're saying his condition is fine right now? Why don't those on the left get all over Twitter and get all over Facebook and wish him the best? Why is the so-called tolerant left not very tolerant of this particular president? And why is the so-called tolerant left not in some kind of mourning or awe with this president and First Lady and many other senior Republicans' current condition of being diagnosed with a virus? Well, speaking personally, because again, Biden and Obama have both come out wishing this president well, so you have to remember that the left is not one solid monolithic block that just hopes that Trump dies. But speaking personally, as somebody who holds left-leaning views and loves this country and loves its citizens, I don't want the man to die from coronavirus. I care about his condition about exactly as much as he's cared about the 205,000 Americans who have currently died while he said that it's a hoax, while he said that it's a Democratic hoax and it's no big deal. But I don't want the man to die. Do I think the vice president might address it more strongly than somebody who's gotten up in front of thousands of people and said that this is no big deal and we're going to be opening fine in about 2 weeks, and has said that for like the last 6 months? Yes, I think the vice president might take it a little bit more seriously. But I don't want the man to die. Do I think that his death from coronavirus, if it were to occur, would result in us taking this more seriously? Would result in more American lives being saved? Potentially, but I don't know. And I still don't want the man to die. I want the man to have, just like the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson had, I want him to have a serious bout with coronavirus. I want him to realize why the CDC has been telling him that this is a big deal. I want him to realize that 205,000 American citizens have died from this virus, and it's still going on, and that the day that he was diagnosed, or the day that it was released he was diagnosed, Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, removed its mandatory mask mandate. Because that's not ironic. I don't want the man to die because A, I don't want a president to die. B, I want him voted out of office with a massive repudiation of this fascism light we've been dancing on for a little while. And I don't want him turned into some kind of martyr by some of these conspiracy theorists out there on the right that are going to start immediately after his death talking about how it wasn't really coronavirus. It was the deep state. I want it proven this November that this kind of message of hate and bigotry is not electable. And that the American people are big enough and smart enough and have the moral courage to stand up and say, we made a mistake 4 years ago. But just like any honest adult, just like any well-meaning adult, just like any moral citizen, we can admit that and we can fix it. I don't want the man to die because I don't want somebody else running on this message in 4 years. I want those on the extreme right to know that this message is not electable. And then I want this man prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for the different crimes he's committed. That would be my ideal outcome. Now, Mr. Chris, on the left, you're not being very tolerant right now. The man is sick. The man might be potentially dying. You should be a little bit more civil with him. Right now, all things considered. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that from my friends, my conservative friends on the right now. And all I have to say to that is after the last 4 years of this president openly mocking people, constantly picking fights and insulting those who disagree with him, tweeting out stuff about white power and how the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat. I don't care about your calls for civility until you're going to hold your own side, your own president, the leader of your party, to the same standard. Me pointing out that your president has not taken this disease seriously. Me pointing out that for the last 6 months now, he said it's no big deal and that we're all going to be fine in 2 weeks and that we're going to reopen. Me pointing out that we have 205,000 American citizens who have died to this disease that is no big deal. Me pointing out that the CDC is saying that if we all just wore masks, did nothing else but wore masks between now and January, we would save potentially 66,000 Americans. And me pointing out that your president is against wearing masks. Those are statements of fact. I'm not sorry they don't make your president look good. It is not my fault that your president has been on the wrong side of every single one of these statements. It is not my fault that your president refused to wear masks and take basic precautions. And it is not my fault that he holds rallies where masks are discouraged. And it is not my fault that he holds photo ops where masks are discouraged. It is not my fault that he ignores rules or guidelines that are saying that you're not supposed to have large gatherings right now. And it's not my fault or any of us on the left that he came down with coronavirus. Let's pretend for a minute that we're talking about somebody that's not your president. Let's pretend that we're talking about your buddy, your friend, just some random guy that you happen to know. And let's say that you took this disease halfway seriously. You quarantined your family. You started working remote from home. You wore a mask when you went to the grocery store and when you went to a restaurant. You bought some extra hand sanitizer instead of 5 shopping carts full of toilet paper when this all broke out. Let's say all you had done was wear a mask and stay away from concerts and bars and packed basketball and football stadiums. And let's say your friend had done none of these things. Let's say your friend was going to open-air concerts and packed stadiums. Let's say your friend thought masks were a violation of his personal freedom. Let's say your friend thought that the coronavirus was a hoax. Let's say your friend went about life as usual. Would you be surprised when your friend started feeling sick? And then would you be surprised if the diagnosis came back as coronavirus? Right now, today? I wouldn't. If you go do all the things that the scientists and the doctors are telling you are not smart to do right now, you're playing with fire. If I tell my 5-year-old son, don't go touch the stove because the stove is hot, and here's 205 other thousand people, one after another, you can see them, that have touched the stove and lost their lives, and here's hundreds of thousands of more people who have touched the stove, and you can see that their hands are burned, and here's the pictures of the people in the hospital because they touched the stove. My 5-year-old son knows not to touch the damn stove. If you're going to play with fire, you risk getting burned. But again, I don't want the man to die. I want this entire message, this anti-science message, this anti-education message, this message of hate and bigotry to be rejected. That's what I want. But if you're wondering why some members on the left are having an issue being civil right now, it's because civility has not been this president's strong suit. And it's because those of us on the left find it a little poetic that the guy who's saying it's a hoax and promoting the anti-mask protests that took place a few months ago and has been saying that this is no big deal and holding rallies around the country is now having to admit that, no, well, maybe this is a real thing. We have a comment saying that They said 66,000 less deaths by January. Flattening the curve does not save lives. It only delays when those deaths happen. Epidemiologists have never said that mask or social distancing will save lives. So the whole point of flattening the curve is so that you don't overload the hospitals. I think both you and I, and any reasonable adult, can agree that if you have a medical condition of any kind, be it cancer or a respiratory illness, that having access to hospitals and doctors and having rooms in those hospitals and doctors that aren't already filled with other patients so you can actually be placed in there is a good thing. And the reason that you're supposed to do these shutdowns, like Israel's talking about doing a second shutdown right now, is because you don't want the curve to be so high that it floods the hospitals with more people than they can handle. And at a most basic level, I think reasonable adults can agree that on average, if you receive medical attention for any disease, your chances of survival increase. That's the point of flattening the curve, so that you don't break the medical system. Just like a tidal wave full of water can knock down a building, but if I take that same amount of water and instead of dumping it all on that building all at once, I just let it trickle over years, it doesn't knock down the building. We're trying to keep the system still standing so that it doesn't get flooded all at once. A whole lot of water, a whole lot of cases can be spread out over a long period of time, and the damage isn't near as great as a whole lot of water being dumped in one place at one time. McDonald's may be able to make 1 billion hamburgers in a year, but if I go to the drive-thru at one McDonald's and order 5 million hamburgers, I'm going to break what that system can handle. And that's what we're trying to avoid right now. Masks decrease the rate at which the disease spreads. They do not eradicate it. They seriously decrease the chance of you infecting somebody else. That's from the CDC. That's not from me. But at a basic level, to me, a non-medical expert, it makes sense. I wear pants. If I was in the habit of just peeing everywhere, my pants would keep that pee contained to me, and it wouldn't get on you, or at least it's a whole lot less likely to get on you. Mask covers the same thing. Obviously, I am in a habit of breathing everywhere I go. If I wear a mask, it decreases the chance of my breath and the germs and the viruses contained potentially in that breath of getting on you. And if we can lower the rate at which this spreads, then the hospitals can handle the cases we would have as they come in. That's the goal of the masks. Nobody's sitting here promising that the mask is a magic panacea and that the mask would be like a vaccine. Nobody thinks that the mask is a smallpox or polio vaccination. The reason everybody is advocating it, from the head of the CDC on down, is again to reduce the rate at which it spreads so that we do not break the system. If the American medical system was viewed as one McDonald's, we don't want to order 1 billion hamburgers all at once. And right now, with this thing spreading like wildfire, that's what we're potentially dealing with. This is what we're looking at in terms of total cases since the CDC began tracking it. As you can see, we never succeeded in flattening the curve. We are tracking on exactly what we were worried about happening. This is why we're pushing masks so hard. Again, it's not 100% guarantee any more than a condom is 100% guarantee that you won't get pregnant. But a 90+% reduction rate is pretty good odds, and it's better than doing nothing. Now, to jump onto the civility train a little bit, this is what we've been looking at for the last several years. And this is why it's hard for those of us on the left to take those on the right who are currently asking for civility right now serious.
What a stupid question that is. What a stupid question. But I watch you a lot. You ask a lot of stupid questions.
Should the woman
Quiet. Get him out of here. Get out.
Excuse me, sit down. You weren't called. Sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Go back to Univision. Quiet.
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
He's a sleaze.
Why am I saying?
You're a sleaze.
Quiet. Since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization.
You are attacking our news organization.
Quiet.
Knock the crap out of him, would you? Seriously.
Now, obviously, he's speaking to people that he disagrees with. I understand that. But those of us on the left disagree with all the policies he's putting into place. You know, the thing that's led to those 205,000 and counting dead Americans. So if that behavior is okay on that side, if it's okay from President Trump, then why is it not okay from those of us on the left? That's, again, what I'm dealing with. It's hard for me to see past the hypocrisy. If you want to vote for that kind of behavior, then that's the kind of behavior that I think that you accept. That's the kind of behavior that I think gets a message across to you, because that's the kind of behavior that you elected. Now those, okay, some of that was just argumentative. That's fine. I understand that. But wait, there's more.
Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. This is 14 years ago. They didn't do a retraction.
There's the president that you voted for, openly mocking a reporter for a medical condition that he has. It would seem to me, again, trying to be generous here and play by the same standards, that if this is the kind of behavior that resonates with conservative voters, and I would be led to think that, since obviously this is the leader of the Republican Party right now, that if I want to communicate effectively with you, then maybe mocking existing medical conditions, you know, like testing positive for COVID after saying for months that it's a hoax and everything is fine and that we're going to go back to normal in 2 weeks, it would seem to me that maybe an effective method, and a method that you would appreciate as a conservative for me to use in communicating with you, would be mockery. I don't know where I'm getting this impression from. Maybe I should look to the leader of the Conservative Party to see what kind of way he conveys his message. I would think that looking to the leader of either party would be a fairly useful tool in understanding how the members of that party communicate with each other. So obviously we've determined at this point that mocking medical conditions, pre-existing medical conditions, is not off limits, is well within the bounds of political discourse. Because this is in a national television interview. This isn't just on Twitter. This isn't just on a personal Facebook. This isn't on some anonymous internet forum. This is acting and speaking as the head of the Republican Party and the President of the United States. So again, if we all want to play by the same rules and we all want to communicate our message effectively with each other, for conservatives that I've spoken with this week, or conversations that I've seen online, or memes that I've seen posted on Facebook or on Twitter, it would seem that mockery of a medical condition is certainly not off limits. As you conservatives have pointed out for 4 years now, he's not just your president, he's the president of every American. So we're just following his example. Now, if you want to scream about how politics and political discourse should be above that, I won't disagree with you. But that puts your opinion much closer to former Vice President Joe Biden's, and that puts your message and opinion much closer to former President Obama's than it does to this guy. So if you want to elevate the political discourse to where mockery about pre-existing medical conditions is something that's not acceptable, I don't have any complaints with that. The leaders of the Democratic Party apparently don't have any complaints with that because they're not the ones out there spreading that message. The leader of the Conservative Party is the one out there doing that message. Oh, but they're talking about him dying.
Early Tuesday morning, as seen in this screenshot shared by MSNBC producer Kyle Griffin, the president retweeted an image posted by a Trump supporter that shows a train bearing the Trump label barreling into an image of a CNN journalist. The president then quickly deleted the post.
So again, we've determined that tweeting or saying things online about the opposition and making jokes about their death is well within the bounds of conservative political discourse. You don't get to hit me over the head with a bat and then cry foul when I pick up one too. If we're playing basketball and you're throwing elbows when you're going for a rebound, first couple of times I might point it out. After that, you got to expect me to start throwing elbows too, if I have to keep playing. And then for you to sit there on your side and scream foul when you don't like getting hit by elbows, hey, I'm fine with changing the rules and what's normal back to not throwing elbows. I'm fine with elevating the level of political discourse. I don't see Obama and I don't see Joe Biden out there tweeting about running over Fox News commenters with trains. Oh, but that was a political cartoon. Chris, that was a political cartoon. It's no big deal. Can't you take a joke, man? Your own president deleted it because he realized he crossed the line. So I'm not the one making a big deal about nothing here. But hey, if you want one that's not a cartoon, there's one for that too.
I've come to a place where I've come to the conclusion that the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat. I don't say that in the physical sense, and I can already see the videos getting edited where it says, oh, we're going to murder Democrats. No, I say that in the political sense.
Now, why, Chris, is some speech at what looks like a rodeo or something by some cowboy, why does that matter? Everybody's entitled to their opinions. They surely are. I've got no disagreement with that. Your president retweeted it. Your president expanded that message to a national audience. And when you send something out again, you're implicitly saying, I agree with this, unless you explicitly at the top say, I disagree with this. And you know how I know that? Because Republicans used to do it. Remember during the campaign, Obama's first campaign, when Senator John McCain was running for office, and I believe it was at a town hall of his, when a Republican lady stood up and started talking about how Obama was a secret Kenyan Muslim terrorist, and he literally put up his hand and said, no, ma'am, we have some serious disagreements on policy, but Obama is a fine American. He didn't take her video and send it out to a national audience without saying why it was wrong. But if you're going to say and send out as the head of the conservative party in American politics that the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat, and I don't mean go out and murder Democrats, I mean in the political sense, and you're going to say that mocking people with disabilities, pre-existing medical conditions, is acceptable behavior, then I don't see what's so out of bounds anymore. And if you're going to vote for this guy and this message, then I don't see where you have room to cry foul when your opposition starts trying to play by the same rules. It's not me who changed him. It's not me who voted for the guy that lowered the level of political discourse in this country. It's not me who elected him. If you want to go back to a higher level of political discourse, I don't disagree with you. But I'm not the one voting for the guy lowering it. And if that's the way that you prefer to be communicated with, which is how it appears to me, when that's who you're voting for, and that is the prime, most powerful communicator of your message, if that's how you want to be communicated to, and that's how it appears to me, again, if you're going to throw elbows, you're going to have to expect to catch a few, and you don't get to cry foul. If you want to go back to not throwing elbows and talking about policy and not mockery, I'm fine with that. I've had civil discussions with every caller who has called in and been civil. I have had civil discussions personally with everybody who has been civil with me. If you want to get into insults, if you want to get into mockery, we can go there. But I'm not the one making that decision. We're going to take a short intermission. We'll check for calls after a couple of minutes, and then we'll dive into the next topic. Thank you, and I hope you're enjoying the show. Welcome back, everybody. So we've got a comment that says, the downside from this point forward is that the left can no longer claim the moral high ground on the civility issue. You may be right to throw elbows as well, but in doing so, you give up your right to call foul also. But overall, that person agrees with the statement. I don't disagree, but if those are the rules of the game, then you can't play the game with one hand tied behind your back. If two boxers walk into the room, or walk into the ring rather, and agree to tie their right hand behind their back and only fight with their left hand, one can't honor that rule and the other one not, and have remotely a fair outcome. I can say with confidence that I want civility back in politics. But if the other side does not agree with me and does not hold their own side to that same standard, then to expect me to hold my side to that standard is ridiculous. That's simple game theory. If two people are playing a game and they agree on the rules, both sides have to play by the rules. If one side doesn't play by the rules, if the other side doesn't adapt to the new rules, then the side that's not playing by the agreed upon rules will always have an advantage. The hope is that by punishing the side that's not playing by the rules, they remember why they agreed to those rules in the first place, and that you can return to the rules being put back into place that everybody agreed was a good idea. Again, as I pointed out during that segment, remember that it's not the leaders currently of the left, of progressive politics in this country, and I'm using the term progressive very loosely because obviously I don't agree with President Biden or former Vice President Biden on every topic. But they're not the ones that are being uncivil. They're not the ones wishing Trump anything other than a speedy recovery. Me personally, while I don't particularly hope it's speedy, because I don't want him coming out and minimizing this message, this virus, yet again, I do hope he recovers well. But I hope he has a serious enough case that he takes it seriously from here forward, just like Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the United Kingdom did. Boris Johnson was on the Trump message 4 or 5 months ago. You don't need to wear a mask. You don't need to take this seriously. We'll be fine. The system can handle it. And he decided it would be a great photo opportunity to walk into a hospital full of COVID patients and shake hands while not wearing a mask. And then he got diagnosed with coronavirus. And then, just like President Trump, he got transferred to a hospital for observation. And then, for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, his case took a serious turn for the worst. For the worse, excuse me. He ended up in intensive care and was out of commission for, I believe it was 2 weeks. And when he came back, his messaging on coronavirus had changed substantially. And that's what I want. I want the messaging to change so that less people in this country get affected by it, so that less American citizens die, so that less American citizens end up with permanent respiratory conditions as a result of this that will affect them for the rest of their lives, and so that less American citizens end up with permanent heart conditions, which we know COVID can cause, that will affect them for the rest of their lives, and that less American citizens end up with less medical debt that will affect them for the rest of their lives. Again, I don't want Trump to die. I'm not the one up here saying that. But I do want him to realize that the stove is indeed hot. And if the only way for him to realize that is to touch it himself and get burned, not killed, burned, so that he will quit telling his fellow supporters to touch everybody else with the stove and to touch the stove themselves. And so he will start telling them, hey, that stove over there, it's really hot. You shouldn't touch it. We need to take that thing seriously. This is no joke. It can hurt you. If he has to get burned a little himself to realize that, so that we can, get down to the serious work of saving American citizens, instead of leaving this to all the individual governors to figure out, well, I'm not opposed. Not at this point. Because clearly, people more educated than myself in the medical field have not been able to get this man to take it seriously. So if the only thing he will understand is touching the stove and burning his hand, that's the only thing he's going to understand. And if that saves thousands of American lives, I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to saving thousands of American lives during a national pandemic. And if the right wants to go back to being civil, if they want to reject this message from this man and this behavior, I'm all in favor. If those on the conservative right want to keep endorsing this message and this behavior, I'm not going to fault anybody on the progressive left for not keeping their right hand, tied behind their back. Saving lives is more important than being able to claim the moral high ground and a moral victory. But I will say, again, that if you want to come back to civility and have a civil discussion, I'm all in favor of that. Now, to launch into the second topic, and we're going to go more in depth into this next week, because obviously the coronavirus bit and Trump's and many Republicans, many senior Republicans, the head of the Republican National Committee, I think we're up to 3 senators now, President Trump himself, and the First Lady being diagnosed with coronavirus, kind of derailed a little bit of what we wanted to cover this week, which is how encouraging white supremacist groups and radical groups, even if you're not one yourself, because I don't think Trump is a literal Nazi or anything like that. He might be a little bit of a bigot, but that's not the same thing as being a card-carrying member of the KKK, okay, and I recognize that distinction, but how he's emboldening them. I've discussed politics personally with friends for years, in person, on Facebook, on friends' Facebooks, on Twitter, on YouTube, and obviously, in politics, like with religion, you're going to find plenty of points of disagreement. Now, this is the segment, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. I will have more documentation for you next week, and we will dive into it further next week. But this is the segment I mentioned at the beginning of the show where I'm going to talk about my personal experience for a minute here. I have never had death threats wished to me personally. Not talking about speaking as the host of the show. Personally. That changed after the debate. It doesn't bother me. I'm not scared. But the tone of the conversation is changing. These people who would have never had the courage to tell me that they were going to hang me on the day of the gallows and that I would need to personally look out for them on the day of the rope, which, in case you're not aware of, comes from a fascist neo-Nazi piece of propaganda known as the Turner Diaries, the same book that inspired Timothy McVeigh, the same Timothy McVeigh that's also known as the Oklahoma City bomber. The day of the rope refers to the day when these people are successful and hang all the race traitors. Now, I've always known that these people existed. And I'm not saying, not even remotely saying, that all conservatives are these people. I'm not saying that most conservatives are these people. I'm saying that I had never had personal interactions with these people. Again, on my private accounts. I've run into a few of them on the show accounts, but I expect that. Since the debate, since we couldn't come out and outright denounce white supremacy and fascist organizations, I have run into 3 separate individuals, again, who are now comfortable making these statements public. They probably always believed them. Obviously, I don't think these guys went and read a bunch of neo-Nazi fascist propaganda since the presidential debate. But the point is, now they're comfortable making these statements in public, using real names instead of anonymous names. Again, I'm going to dive into this subject a whole lot more next week because we're almost out of time for this week. But speaking personally, there's something to be said about people at the highest level not being able to condemn fascist or white supremacist organizations. And then those people that are members of those organizations or think the same way that they do, becoming emboldened and becoming braver and becoming more public as a result of it, as a result of not being condemned when specifically asked. Being told to stand back and stand by is not the same thing as a condemnation. If I took my former military unit, my infantry unit, and told my soldiers to stand back and stand by, that is not remotely the same order as to stand down. And again, to clarify, this is not most conservatives. This is the fringe lunatics, the QAnons and the KKKs and the neo-Nazis. But if you're the leader of the Conservative Party and you can't condemn that fringe, then there's a major problem. And that's what we'll be discussing next week. I think on that note, we're going to show one more video regarding COVID and exactly what message I want to change coming from the conservative media. And then we'll wrap up the show.
Scaring the living hell out of people, and I see it again as like, oh, let's bludgeon Trump with this new hoax. By the way, this program has always taken the coronavirus seriously, and we've never called the virus a hoax.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry about.
I was about to say the same thing. Let me tell you something. This virus should be compared to the flu, because at worst case scenario, it could be the flu.
So all the talk about coronavirus being so much more deadly doesn't reflect reality. Without a vaccine, the flu would be far more deadly.
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president. And sadly, it seems they care very little for any of the destruction they are leaving in their wake.
We don't have immunity to this virus. It's a new virus. It's a pandemic strain of a virus we haven't seen before.
You know, it's critical we know who has this. We must test for the virus in order to stop the spread of it.
We're facing an incredibly contagious and dangerous virus that is moving across the world from one hotspot to another.
We kind of laugh at it, but nothing to laugh at here. By the way, this program has always taken the coronavirus seriously, and we've never called the virus a hoax. It's like, oh, let's bludgeon Trump with this new hoax.
I'm not afraid of the coronavirus, and no one else should be that afraid either.
I am responsible for transmitting accurate messaging and information.
I was pretty calm before all this, but then I got a little less calm when people told me to stay calm.
The hate is boiling over.
Democrats and their media minions are even trying to blame President Trump for the global coronavirus.
Anything to attack President Trump. It's the Trump virus. What are you talking about?
Ebola. He's imported Ebola into America.
I look at Ebola as a medical terrorist.
There's no reason to panic at all.
There's tons of hyperbole and speculation, none of which is helpful at all.
The entire problem we're having is due to panic, not the virus.
Ebola fear spreading across the nation.
It's scary.
This Ebola crisis and this Ebola scare.
Do you think America could be overwhelmed with Ebola?
Absolutely.
Are we freaking out too much?
Most people who have it have just mild symptoms.
Correct.
They're just sitting at home eating soup.
They have contained this thing. Let's everybody get about your business.
It's a disaster, and it is panic all over the country.
The president needs more help, and the public's worried that the government can't handle the Ebola crisis.
Watch the Democrats, watch the media. You start to feel like they're rooting for coronavirus to spread. If you want Trump to fail, then you're scum. Because if Trump fails, people die. The panic isn't about the disease. The panic is about the leadership.
The president said that this disease wouldn't make it here. Well, then it did. And then when it got here, it wasn't going to spread. Well, now it has.
I think very few people trust our government as being competent. And it all really starts at the top. It starts with Obama.
I think the president has been projecting calm. He's been very cool.
Do I want my president running around screaming like, we're all gonna die? No, I love that he was like, there's
we're going to be okay. Are we all just panicking about this? Should we just chill out and not worry about it?
I'm just sick of a government that I'm paying for telling me not to worry and just trust them.
I think the President of the United States, by his lackadaisical attitude, is responsible if there is any hysteria.
There is no need to panic like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer want you to do.
Anyone who is exacerbating the unease that the American people feel, shame on them, reject them.
This is so insane, and I'm so angry now, and I'm blaming it on the President, those morons at the CDC, those morons in the White House.
We are taking this very seriously at the highest levels of government.
I don't know how reassuring that is, that the highest levels of government are taking this really seriously.
Do you think this is far worse than the government is telling us?
Either they're lying, Sean, or they're grossly incompetent.
Obama's incompetency, his administration's incompetency, is really shining bright in this one.
The level of derangement is off the charts.
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president.
It's like the Russia hoax. It's like the Ukrainian hoax. This is another hoax.
Sowing fear, panic, distrust. The same to Anthony Fauci this week, and I felt like he was a political hack.
Tony Fauci, one of the heroes in the
Anthony
Battle of the
Fauci,
States.
absolutely.
Tony Fauci, terrific.
Ebola response coordinator Ron McClain.
Not a health professional. Look at the people who our taxpayer dollars are already paying actual physicians whose jobs you might think it would be.
Vice President Pence is an inspired choice to lead this effort. It could be a month from now we're not even talking about coronavirus.
We all love golf. There are times to play and there are times that you can't play, and it sends the wrong signal.
A bit of golf for the president this morning, not much else. Obviously, we don't expect him to do anything today, but should he make himself available or come out in public, I promise to tell you all about it.
Are we really trying that hard to keep Ebola out?
Coverage of this virus has been actually dangerous and counterproductive.
Even though the numbers are going up, the hysteria level should actually go down.
There's speculation it could get worse. Some say, like the president, it could miraculously disappear.
This is coming to a community near us, is that what you're saying?
It seems to be just absolutely inevitable.
That's a chilling prognosis. You know, what does it say about the state of our politics? We can't even agree to work together on solving a virus that will attack all of us.
If he says we're assessing the risk and we're going to take it day by day, they're going to say he's not paying enough attention and he's incompetent.
If he doesn't show up, then this table will say, where the hell is he? And then if he does show up, we go, oh man, we're all going to die.
Hey, Corona.
We will never be the destroy, psychotic, hate Trump media mob. We seek the truth.
So let's look at that. How many total Ebola cases in the United States were causing all that panic? We had 11 with 2 deaths. $11 with 2 deaths. And you won't find, I'm just going to take a wild guess, because I haven't done research into it, but I'm betting you won't find a quote from President Obama saying that it's a Democratic or that it's a Republican hoax and that there's nothing to worry about. As I recall, we took it quite seriously. That's the message I want to change. That's the reason I'm okay with President Trump getting his hand burned by touching the stove. Because it's going to save a hell of a lot more than 2 American lives. I don't want it to go to hysteria mode either. They don't need to blow it up to the same sense that they were propagandizing Ebola. But if you're going to take Ebola that seriously, two deaths versus 200,000 and counting deaths. And you feel free to tell me which one Fox News and conservative news media wanted to take more seriously. That's going to be all for me today, folks. I thank y'all for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you here next Sunday. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and enjoy your weekend.